Hi, my name is Em, aka Meema Makes, and I'm a crochet designer, a knitter and a content creator based in the UK, and this is my monthly podcast where I talk about everything crafty that I've been up to in the last month, mainly crochet and knitting. Before we dive into the 4 projects I want to share today, I just want to say a massive thank you for all of your supportive comments on my last video about the future of the Meema Makes channel and about my house move. We have now moved house, we've been here about a month now. I'm starting to feel settled in now. It's been very hectic and draining, and we are filming the first video in my brand new craft room. I haven't done a huge amount to this craft room just yet. I bought this cabinet, I bought this chair, and I've put up a lot of pink paint samples. We did have some electrical work done as well, so all of that messy plaster will get painted over. So I think I've got the camera back in the same position. I was talking about my craft room makeover, so I am going to be filming the process of making over my craft room, organising it, and I'm going to give you a tour of my yarn stash. If any of that sounds like good content to you, then do hit that subscribe button, because I'll be uploading those sorts of videos over the next few weeks and months. So now I'm going to start talking about the 4 projects that I wanted to share with you today. So I've only got one finished object to share with you today, and that is the jumper that I'm wearing. This is the Ranunculus pattern by Midori Hirose. I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. I will always put the pattern name and the designer name on the screen in text as well, just in case I do get it wrong. So this is the Ranunculus pattern. It's a really popular pattern on Ravelry, and I've been meaning to knit it for a while to see what all of the fuss was about. I understand the fuss now. This is such a customizable pattern, and it has this really pretty lace and textured yoke. It's a circular, top down circular yoke that also has some raglan increases here, and I chose to knit it in the yarn Rowan Patina in the shade Old Gold. This is a really beautiful, I'll bring it closer to the camera so you can see. This is a really beautiful mohair blend. There's some wool, there's some nylon and polyester in there I think, and it's got this subtle shimmer in there as well as the fluff from mohair, and for a mohair yarn it is quite soft. I don't feel much of an itch. The only place I really feel an itch from this yarn is here, and it's really mild, which is good because I have had problems in the past with yarn that's too itchy for me. So that was really good that this yarn was soft, because I bought it off the internet without feeling it. So I was very lucky that my skin doesn't hate this yarn. I really hated knitting with this yarn, if I'm completely honest. It was really sticky and difficult to knit with, but the finished jumper is so light and airy. I'll put some footage in now of me wearing it so you can see the whole thing, so I don't need to get up and show you now. But yeah, it's just, the fabric is just so light and airy and open, and I used 6mm needles, which were the recommended needle sizes for the pattern. The yarn recommended a 4mm needle, so it is knit at quite an open gauge. And I think that works quite well because this is quite warm, but it's still breathable. Like, it doesn't make me feel a bit sweaty at all in it. So I mostly followed the pattern. I messed up the raglan increases, so I sort of went a bit off pattern there. I also didn't do the short row shaping, I can't just stay and talk. I didn't do the short row shaping on the sleeve. It has this weird diagonal sleeve. I didn't do that. And I wish, so it has short row shaping at the back to raise the back of the neckline, which is quite normal, but it also has short row shaping at the front, and I've not seen that before, and I think it's to give it more of like a boat neck. I really don't like it. I wish that I had not done that short row shaping, because it's not a lot, it's about 4 rows, but if I had, the neckline would be like that and it wouldn't be itching my neck right here, so that's really frustrating. However, I'm really pleased with the finished jumper. I do apologise, it's quite creased. I got it out of the bag. It's been in since before we moved mid-March today, just to show you, and it's not been blocked. And I honestly think this jumper needs blocking, and I think that will improve sort of the shape of it and the lightness and the airiness of it. But yeah, this was my first ever finished pullover rather than a cardigan, and I'm so happy with it. Yeah, I will probably not get a lot of wear out of it though, because we are at the end of April moving into May. I've got the sun streaming through the window at me and I'm getting a little bit warm in it, so I'm not sure how much wear I'll get of it this season, but I'm sure that in autumn I will love it, especially given it's quite an autumnal colour as well. It's that sort of like golden browny beige colour. But yeah, I love this jumper. And yeah, I'm really proud of myself that I actually managed to finish a knitted jumper. I finished some knitted cardigans. I started a knitted jumper years ago and it turned out like a tent, so I gave up halfway through and I never went back. But I've kind of like built my confidence back up with my knitting, and I'm feeling a lot more sort of confident to tackle things that I've potentially not done before. Like I did a tubular bind on for this, and did I do an Italian cast off? No, that was my cardigan. I did an Italian cast off. But yeah, so I did tubular bind on, cast on. Is a bind on a thing? Because I know that bind off is a thing and cast on is a thing. But yeah, anyways, I did a tubular cast on, which was really interesting, and I learnt some interesting increases and some texture stitches. So I do really, really like this pattern. It's so clear. The instructions are really straightforward. There's these little videos if there's like an increase or a decrease that you've not done before, and there's like these really clear diagrams as well. I can see why it's such a popular pattern. I would really like to knit a short sleeve t-shirt style one in cotton, but probably not this year because I've got so many knitted things that I want to knit. Which leads me into my next two projects, which are also fluffy jumpers. I have a lot of following from elsewhere in the world, so in the UK we call sweaters jumpers. So yeah, so I've got two jumpers, let me grab those. These two jumpers are both works in progress, and I just wanted to show, I think I showed this project bag in my last podcast and said that I'd ordered some more, and I did. This was one of them. I think one of these is still available. They're from the Woolly Tangle, who also dyes yarn, but I really love her large sized project bags because they're just perfect to fit jumpers in basically. So let's start with this one because I talked about the yarn for both of these actually at the end of my last podcast. I sort of talked generally about my plans for knitting jumpers and things for 2024 and some yarn that I bought. So if that sounds interesting, I will link that last podcast episode at the end of this podcast episode, so you can head over there and watch it if you've missed it already. So we'll start with the yarn that I'm using, and it's another fluffy, I don't know what it is about me recently. I think I've discovered that actually fluff doesn't itch me, so I want to make all of the fluffy things. So this is the yarn combination that I'm using. So this is a hand-dyed Suri silk alpaca lace weight yarn from Hedgerow Yarns. It's in her colourway Smitten. I really should have looked all of this up as well as designer names and everything. And then this is Filcolana Arwetta, which is their sock yarn in, I think it's like soft blush or blush pink, something like that. I'll put it on the screen. So yeah, and they're a really good pink match. The bright sun that's glaring in at this is really not the best lighting, but they're a really soft millennial pink, which is what I talked a little bit about in the last episode, that really soft millennial pink is kind of like my colour. I love it. It's the colour I want my office to be. So yeah, so those are the yarns that we're using, and the pattern that I chose to do, so with the sock yarn and the late waist held together, that's about a double knit weight gauge. And the pattern that I chose to do is my very first petite knit pattern, and I don't think I talked about this pattern in my plans. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, so this is by Petite Knit and it's called the Moby Sweater, and it is cables. So I've got cables and fluff. That's a little bit better actually without the sun glaring off it. It's really blowing out the colour. It's a very, think millennial pink. That's basically what this is a soft pink, and I ummed and ahed about the pattern for this yarn for quite a long time because I knew I wanted cables, but I couldn't find what was in my head. And now that she's released it, I wish I had saved this yarn and knitted the Lauder sweater by Rebecca Clow, because I think that would have been exactly what I wanted. But I'd already gotten quite away with this when she released it and I was a bit impatient to start. So anyway, yeah, so this is the Moby Sweater. I'm not sure I would recommend this pattern unless you're really experienced at knitting drop shoulder sweaters with short row shaping at the back, because I found that, because it's a translation from Danish to English, I found that the translation was a little bit vague and it's hard to put into words. I just found it really difficult to understand what was going on, and if I hadn't already knitted a cardigan with that same, literally almost exactly the same construction, I would have been really lost. So yeah. So this is the Moby Sweater. I'm following there's like 2 charts, there's a smaller one and a bigger one, so I followed the bigger one. I can't remember exactly what size I'm making. It's usually about 6 or a 7 for my bust size is 48 inches, so it's usually about a size 6 or a size 7 in, or like 2XL in knitting patterns. So I'll put the size on the screen that I'm actually knitting. So I am following the chart for the bigger one, but these 2 cables that run down either side, I shrunk them in a little bit because they just looked a bit weird in my swatch. So I don't have my swatch anymore, I think I unwound it, but yeah. So you cast on along the back of the neck and along the back of the shoulders, and then you knit down the back, and then you knit down the front, join at the underarms, and then you start knitting in the round. So you knit flat to start knitting in the round. I did go back and add my folded collar on though, because I wanted to check about my armhole depth, because the first time I joined my armholes, I tried it on and like the armholes were down by my hips. I don't know what I'd done wrong, whether it was a row gauge problem or the size problem. I don't know what I'd done wrong. I had exactly the right number of rows. I didn't go off pattern at all, apart from the shrinking that cable in a little bit. So I'm not really sure what I did wrong. So I ended up ripping back and making the armholes shorter so that they weren't so baggy. I think it's probably because it's supposed to be quite an oversized fit, but I found that the armholes were way too big. So I don't know if that was a me issue or a pattern issue. So yeah, this is as far as I've got. I've kind of put it down for now because it requires a bit more brain power to follow that cable chart than I want to spend on a pattern, on a knit project right now. So I've sort of put this down for a few weeks and I've not picked it up. So I might actually put this down until later in the year, potentially after the summer. I've not quite decided yet, but you may or may not see this in the next podcast. I don't know yet if I'm going to put it down, but yeah. I really like the yarn combination. I would recommend both the yarns. I would not necessarily recommend the pattern unless you're an experienced knitter, but yeah. I am quite enjoying it though. I'm like, oh, the sun's gone in a bit, so maybe you can see that pink a little bit better. Still blowing out a little bit though. Yeah, it's a really lovely texture. I really like this, the lattice pattern in the centre, and it looks like it's like cables, but it's actually like where you decrease and increase at the same time. It's like travelling stitches, I think is the technique. It was really interesting to learn actually. Like knitting these 2 jumpers and the jumper I'm going to talk about, I've learned so much about construction of clothing and the different ways of doing it, because like I've got a round yoke, this is a drop shoulder, and then the other one that I will show you in a minute is a raglan. So I feel like I'm learning about those different constructions of the yoke. So the yoke is this part of the sweater, and I think that, yeah, I feel like my knitting in the last year and a half, maybe a year, I've built my confidence up, I've built my skills up, I feel a lot more comfortable with it. Before I was a crocheter, I understood crochet, I was an advanced crocheter, but I was always a beginner knitter, and I really struggled with things like colourwork and cables and more complicated decreases than like knit 2 together and slip slip knit. And yeah, so I feel like I'm building my confidence up, which is kind of like what I want for it, because at the minute crochet feels a little bit like work, whereas knitting feels like fun. So I want my fun thing to be also building my skills and learning new things. So yeah, really enjoying knitting at the minute. And then my other work in progress jumper is another one with 2 strands of yarn held together. Let me just get those out first. I showed one of these yarns in my last podcast episode at the end, where I talked about patterns, and I have actually ended up knitting a different pattern to the one I said I was going to knit. So I was originally going to knit the Lento sweater by, I can't remember her name, I'll put it on screen, but I'll talk about that in a minute. I was originally going to use this yarn here. So this is a hand-dyed yarn from Giddy Yarns, who was a hand dyer in Northern Ireland. Since the last podcast, she's actually shut up shop now. She's not dyeing anymore, so this is going to be my only project in her yarns, which is kind of sad, but yeah. So this is the yarn that I got. You can see it's this beautiful deep purple. I was expecting it to be more burgundy from the photos, but it is a really beautiful colour, but I decided that I wasn't going to use this for the pattern I bought the yarn for in the first place. I talked a little bit about all of this planning in the last podcast. Like I said, I'll link it at the end of this podcast. So then I bought some mohair yarn to hold double with it, because it's so dark, and it's a sport weight yarn as well. I didn't feel ready to knit a jumper at a small gauge because the Moby Sweater is on 4mm needles, and I have never knitted a jumper or a cardigan on less than 5mm, and they seem to like, I'm usually done with them in like 2 months, but I know the double knit ones will take even more, and I really didn't want to knit one in like sport weight that needed like a 3 or 3.5mm needles, so I wanted to hold it double with something. So I bought this Rowan yarn called Rowan Kidsilk Haze in the shade Mulberry, and I had this, I was waiting for this to be delivered in the last podcast episode, so I didn't show this with the yarn. So this came and it was a lot lighter than I thought. However, look at those two together. I think they're just like contrasty enough that I'll show you, it's made a really lovely fabric. So yeah, so this is the Giddy yarn, they're sport weight, and it was in an oddball colour, it wasn't one of her like dyed to orders, but you can't get it now anyway. And then this is Mulberry, the Kidsilk Haze, which is, are you Merino silk blend? I can't remember. Yeah, 70% 70% mohair, not merino. 70% mohair and 30% silk. It's 25 gram ball. So I had 1200 meters of this, so I bought just over 1200 meters of this to knit together, but I think I'm actually not going to use up all of the yarn, which for my size, to be able to knit a jumper in like 1,000 odd meters of yarn is pretty good going, I think. That's not too unreasonable. Anyways, so I swatched up these two colours together, and I was planning on knitting the Lento, which uses a 6mm needles. I can't remember the gauge, but it was 6mm needles, and I did not like the fabric. It was too open, the stitches were quite uneven, so I decided that I didn't want to do a 6mm needle, such an open fabric with a sticky mohair yarn again like I did with this one. I wanted something a bit easier, so I went for 5mm needles. So with all of these fluffy projects, I've actually been using wooden needles. I've been using the Lantern Moon Heirloom interchangeable needle set, and I do really like them. I was actually sent them for a promotion that I did on Instagram, and I didn't really like them when I got them and I was knitting with them. One of them snapped and my stitches kept getting caught, but I think I was just using them for the wrong sort of project. For a project that's at quite an open loose gauge, and for a project with either really slippy yarn or really fluffy yarn, or like at an open gauge, those wooden needles I much prefer over metal needles. I usually use the Knitpro Zing sets, they're my favourite needles, or the Chiaogoo. So I've got the Knitpro, let me start that again. So I've got the Knitpro Zing interchangeable set I've had for years and years and years, that is sort of my like circular needles. I like having an interchangeable set and I've loved them. I've also been using the Chiaogoo thick circular needles for socks, and I also used it for a hat, and I quite like those as well. So in general I prefer metal needles and metal crochet hooks, but the wooden needles, their Lantern Moon set I got sent for promotion on Instagram. I do get sent stuff now and then, so if there's ever anything that's gifted, I will tell you. If I don't tell you, I've bought it myself. I bought these myself, for example. I bought all of the yarn I've talked about today myself with my money. So I was talking about knitting needles. So yeah, I didn't like them to begin with. Now I like them for open gauge, fluffy yarn, anything like that. So yeah, I do recommend them actually. And I recommend the Knitpro Zings. Not that you were here for recommendations, but yeah, I quite liked them. So let's get back to the jumper that I'm knitting with it. I will show you. I'm almost finished. So I cast this on about a week, 2 weeks after the last podcast. Sort of a few days before we moved actually. So I'll have to have a look at my Ravelry and see when I finished it. And I'm almost finished, which is pretty awesome. I feel like this jumper's been a bit all over the place. Let's go back to the basics. So I've shown you the yarn. So I was going to knit a Lento, but I didn't like the fabric. It was quite open, uneven, I didn't like it. But I did like it on a 5mm needles. And that happened to be the gauge for the Tolsta Tee, which was a pattern I bought to use to knit a cotton jumper. So I was like, I'm gonna knit that, and I'm gonna add sleeves, and that's going to be my jumper. So yeah, I've kind of hacked the Tolsta Tee pattern. That's Tolsta Tee by Rebecca Clow. It's quite a popular t-shirt pattern. So yeah, this is my jumper. Let's give you a little close-up of that fabric with those two yarns I was talking about. The sun's got quite bright and low. We're moving into sunset now. I need to hurry up really before the light goes. So yeah, so that's kind of what it looks like with that paler coloured mohair knit together with that dark yarn, I think it just gives this beautiful mottled, almost tweedy colour, and it really softens that really dark purple. I really have loved knitting with this mohair. With it. It's a new discovery for me, is knitting with mohair, because I always thought it was too itchy for me, but my skin sensitivity's changed. I talked a little bit about it in the last episode as well. So yeah, so this is my Tolsta Tee. I think I knit a size 6 again, I think. And then for the sleeves, I just decreased I did 2 decreases every 5th round, and then I just did a 1 by 1 ribbed cuff, and then a tubular bind off, an Italian bind off I think it's also called. And I actually really like this pattern. It's really straightforward and easy, and the stockinette in the round was just what I needed whilst we were moving and we were driving back and forth and waiting for electricians, and while like our friends were moving all of our stuff because I can't help because of my health problems, so I was just sat there like a lemon not doing anything. So I was knitting and being like, that box, that bit of furniture. So yeah, it was really good while we were moving, and it's great TV knitting because it's lots of knitting in the round. So yeah, I'm not going to try this on for you because I'm very nearly finished. I've just started last night the ribbing at the bottom, so I'm going to save it to show you tried on in my next episode when it's finished, because I didn't really want to like put it on a longer cable just to show you it won. Same with the other one. So yeah, I'm not going to try it on, but yeah, I really love this jumper too. It is a little bit more itchy than this one, but it was a lot easier to knit than this one. This one was really sticky yarn together, and I think I prefer the fabric of this one over this one, because this one, it's kind of hard to, don't know if it comes across on camera, it's a little bit even and it kind of looks a little bit not ratty, but there's not much stitch definition, whereas even though this is fluffy, there is some stitch definition. Ooh, now the sun's gone in, that looks really good. Yeah, I love this fabric. So yeah, so that's the Tolsta Tee pattern, and she's actually releasing graded sizes for the Tolsta Tee if you want to turn it into a jumper as well, and bust shaping. So this is the one that I've knit is quite wide, a bit similar fit to this where it's quite wide and open, but there is bust shaping, and she is bringing out the pattern in bust shaping, in fingering weight yarn, and with sleeves for graded for the different sizes, and that's free if you've already got the pattern, or if you're going to buy the pattern, it's not a separate pattern. So it's a really good value for money pattern if you are looking for just a plain in the round t-shirt or jumper pattern that's for double knit. Not for double knit, it's in for fingering weight and double knit, and you could even use it for Aran weight yarn as well. So yeah, it's a really good value pattern. I will link it. I'll link everything down in the description for all of the projects. Okay, so the last project is what has been taking up most of my Meema Makes time recently, and that is the Yorkshire Sampler crochet along blanket. I talked a little about it in the last episode. I'd started some of the squares in the last episode. My update is yesterday I finished all of the squares, and for all 24 squares, and this morning I finished weaving in all the ends and they're ready for blocking. So that's why I'm actually filming the podcast today, because I want to block these squares soon and the sun is almost set. So we will just get these squares out before all of that lovely light goes away. This is a west facing craft room, so I'm going to get some lovely light in the winter for filming in the afternoons, which is going to be great. So I'll talk a little bit about the Yorkshire Sampler blanket, but I did go into it in a lot of detail in the last podcast that again I will link at the end of this video. So the Yorkshire Sampler blanket is going to be a crochet along that's going to run from the 6th of July all the way through until the beginning of November. It consists of 12 different granny square patterns inspired by Yorkshire that I've designed, and it's going to be a crochet along held in collaboration with Yorkshire Yarn Fest. So Yorkshire Yarn Fest is an event held in Yorkshire where I live in the UK, and it's a weekend long event that's going to be running from the 8th to the 10th of November. There's going to be yarn stores, there's going to be workshops and craft nights. I will link down below where you can grab your ticket if you want to see us there. So for Yorkshire Yarn Fest I wanted to design a blanket that was inspired by Yorkshire, and I sort of took those ideas, that is inspiration of Yorkshire, of what being in Yorkshire and my experience of living in Yorkshire, because I'm not from Yorkshire. I moved to Yorkshire in 2016 to train to be a midwife, and I absolutely love living in Yorkshire. It's such a beautiful piece of countryside to live in. I live on the edge of Leeds, and I've been up to the Yorkshire Dales on holiday. I've been over towards York on holiday, and it's just a beautiful part of the country to live in. So I took my favourite memories of living in Yorkshire and used those to sort of inspire the designs for the granny squares, and I did show a few in the last episode. I can't remember exactly which ones I showed, so I will show you some of those now. So I'll just pick out the ones that are on the top of my blanket. Some of these are blocked and some of them aren't. So here, this is the, what's this called? This is called the Windy Moors Square. It's got some textured stitches to represent long grasses and then some bobbles to represent the heather. Oh, this one's a good one. This is the Yorkshire Rose Square. So that is a 5-petaled rose that is the emblem of Yorkshire, and I used that to sort of in the centre of this lacy square. And then this square here, this is a mill wheel square because there are lots and lots of mills in Yorkshire. And then we've got all of the green ones at the minute that are on the top. So this is the foxglove square. This is my favourite of all 12 squares. The sun's getting a bit bright again, but can you see those popcorn stitches there make up the foxglove? It's my absolute fave of all the squares that I designed for this. This one is called Rolling Hills. Those shell stitches there create that hills pattern. This one was inspired by the Yorkshire Dales. And then here, this one is called Wildflowers. This is actually the last one that I finished. And we've got a 3D flower at the centre, and then I'm hoping it's coming across. We've got these popcorn wildflowers there around the squares. And then this one here, I think I showed this one. This one's called A Walk in the Woods, with those diagonal cluster stitches. They are the paths of a walk in the woods with these lovely pine trees here. And then this one is called Fields of Gold. Have I been doing this without my... Oh, I am so sorry if the audio for this has been rubbish, because I've just realised that I forgot to put my microphone back on when I showed you my jumper right at the beginning of this podcast. So I hope this is okay and I don't have to go back and refilm it. Where is my microphone? I'll get it now. Okay, I've put my microphone back on. I'm hoping that's a little bit better for you now. I hope that that's picked up and I don't have to refilm this podcast tomorrow, because who knows if I'll have enough energy to do it. So this is the Fields of Gold square, and if you can see here, we've got some puff stitches to make those sort of ears of wheat. I think they're called ears of wheat there. This is another wildflowers square. This is one of my favourites as well. This is called Falling Leaves, and we use like 6 different types of cluster stitches. This one was to learn cluster stitches, this square. This one's a good one as well. So this is lambing season. So this is inspired by fields of sheep, with those puff stitches there representing sheep dotted across a field. We've got another Walk in the Wood square. This one's in a beautiful dark green. This one's one you've not seen just yet. So this is called the Waterfall Square, and this is actually inspired by Goredale Scar, which is a waterfall in the Dales that I love. So yeah, we've got another Yorkshire Rose square, another Fields of Gold square. So there are 12 square designs in this blanket, but we actually make 24 squares for the blanket. I'll talk a little bit more about sort of the requirements for the blanket at the end of my little show and tell here. So yeah, here's one I definitely showed you last time. This is another Windy Moors square. This one is blocked though, so we're moving on to my little pile of blocked squares now. You can see it's got lovely sharp corners compared to some of the others. I'm actually planning on blocking the rest of these tonight and leaving them out to dry. This one we saw last time as well, so I remember holding it up, but I have got a paler version of this now. This is the Bronte square. Let me just dig around and find the one that shows it off a bit better because it's in a lighter colour. Here we are. So this is the square inspired by the Bronte sisters and Bronte Country, a trip. I went to Bronte Country for my 30th birthday. So this is inspired by that. We've got another blocked Rolling Hills square. That's the Yorkshire Dales Rolling Hills. I think I must have shown you all of them now. There are still like all of the 12 designs. This is another foxglove square. I think that shows up that foxglove shape a little bit better. Yeah, on that lighter coloured yarn, definitely. And then this is the Fields of Sheep square. No, I changed the name of that. This is the Lambing Season square. That's the name I changed it to. That one's been blocked. I feel like these block squares are so much like drapier, if you can see the drape on that. I'll talk about the yarn in a minute. So this is another waterfall square, another mill wheel square, and this is the falling leaves square. This is beautiful as well. It's in like this orangey gold variegated yarn, and it's just the perfect colour for those autumn leaves. So, and then I just want to show you my little basket of leftovers because those squares didn't use up the whole 20 grams. So this blanket, I have crocheted it as if I was using an advent calendar. So that's 24 20 gram mini skeins of sock weight yarn. I used yarn from my stash, mainly from Beehive Yarns, who's one of my favourite yarn dyers, who happens to be showing at Yorkshire Yarn Fest this year. I've never actually met her in person, but she's been so helpful with choosing the background colour for this blanket. So yeah, Beehive Yarns, that's what I was talking about, because I'm going to be joining all of those squares in all of those different colours, all 24 of those squares in this colour. So this, that light is blowing out. We're moving into gold now. Now I can feel that the sun is a bit more golden coloured, so it might be a bit nicer for filming light. So this is called Mouse Bite. This is one of her dyed to order tonals, and she very kindly sent me a few different samples of some of her dyed to order neutrals, and this was the one that I thought went better. It's kind of like, it's not warm, it's not cool, it's a very mid-toned greyish, but it's really, really pale. It's almost like an off-white, but not quite. It's a really lovely colour, but I feel like this sort of slightly cooler beige would actually work well with a lot of the colours for the mini skeins that I chose for the yarn. I'll actually put up a picture of all the mini skeins that I used for this blanket. I think I did change one or two of them out, but the general feel is the same, and they're quite autumnal and warm, a lot of these colours that I chose, because they tend to be the colours that I love to use. This blanket's got quite a lot of warmer sort of golds and oranges and pinks as well. So I thought this slightly cooler colour would sort of like show off those colours the best. I tried it with an undyed, like a cream sock yarn, and it just sort of overwhelmed those colours a little bit, whereas this definitely fades into the background. So this crochet along is going to run from the 6th of July. There are 12 squares, so we're going to do one pattern a week for 12 weeks. Then we're going to join our squares with whatever background colour you choose for 4 weeks, and then for 2 weeks we're going to do the border. So that's an 18-week long crochet along. You don't have to be coming to Yorkshire Yarn Fest to join in the crochet along. It's just, this is sort of like linked sort of in collaboration with Yorkshire Yarn Fest, because on this, I don't think I told you this last time, but on the second night of the crochet along, so the Saturday night, I'm going to be hosting a craft night, and I'm so excited about it. Basically, you can come along, you can bring your in-progress blanket or whatever you want, and we can just have a chat and do some crochet and just get to know each other a little bit better. You do have to buy a separate ticket for that event on top of the ticket price for the whole event, sort of to that craft night. I think it's £8 on top of your ticket costs. So if you are interested in that, I will link that down below, because I would really love to meet some fellow crocheters from Yorkshire and just chat about crochet. And I'm happy to sort of like give impromptu lessons there if there's anything about crochet or about these squares that you don't understand. But yeah, you don't have to be coming to Yorkshire Yarn Fest to join in the crochet along. Everything apart from that craft night is all going to be online. The pattern releases are going to be online, the video tutorials are going to be online, and I'm hopefully going to do a live stream as well, and potentially a Zoom call craft night as well. I'm not 100% set on that yet. I actually have a meeting with Sophie. It is Sophie. I was doubting myself about her name last time, the lady that runs Yorkshire Yarn Fest, who happens to dye for both. She dyes under the name Botanical Yarn as well. She's another hand dyer based in Yorkshire. So I've actually got a Zoom call with her tomorrow to sort of show her my squares and talk a little bit more about how this is all going to run. So once I have those details, I will make a video and a post just with everything you need to know. But for now, just keep that date of 6th of July in your head and think about your yarn choices. So I'm making this blanket in 24 20-gram skeins of fingering or 4-ply or sock weight yarn with a 2.75mm hook. Most people I think will probably need a 3 though, because I just find my tension is a little bit loose at such a small gauge. So that's for the fingering weight yarn. I've actually calculated all of the exact yardages. So for the squares, you need this much total yarn, or 24 mini skeins. And then for the join in the border, you need this much of the background colour. So that can be undyed yarn or a neutral, like this lovely colour Mouse Bite from Beehive Yarns. If crocheting at such a small gauge is not for you, I have also worked out all of the maths if you want to make a double knit weight blanket as well. So I'll put up how much meterage you need for the squares here and for the join and the border here. I am going to show you the border actually. The border, I have based it, so this whole blanket in fact was inspired by a sampler blanket I made at the start of 2023. I think I finished it March 2023, and it went a little bit viral on social media, and I made a couple of videos about how I made it, but it wasn't really a pattern because I used 49 different patterns that I found on Ravelry for it. I'll have put up some footage, I'm sure. So for that I designed a join as you go method for it, and I did a tutorial for it, and I did a border, but I was not happy with the border. I didn't want to do a tutorial or release a pattern for it because it just didn't lie flat, and I don't want to give you a dud pattern. I wanted something that works. So I have managed it. I have turned that scalloped border into a pattern, and that's going to be part of this blanket pattern, and I'll show you it now. I think this might be my favourite part of the whole blanket. Honestly, this border is going to look stunning. How beautiful is that? So those big scallops, there's some puff stitches in there. Oh, it's going to look so beautiful on this blanket. I wanted the scallops, but as I was crocheting this design, it kind of reminded me of sunsets. You can see that, I think, is the sun, and then those puff stitches are the sun rays. So yeah, so I've actually called this the sunset border, and I actually, when me and my partner first started seeing each other, we actually went up to a place called Otley Shevin, which is a hill between Leeds and the town of Otley, and you can see across the surrounding countryside. And we went up there and we watched the sunset together, and it's a really lovely memory I have of being we started dating during the pandemic, so we had to bubble with each other. We were like, right, we want to date, we want to see each other, but we're supposed to be bubbling, because if you're not in the UK, basically you could partner up with one house and you were sort of treated as one quarantine unit essentially, so you weren't supposed to see any other people. I worked in the hospital at the time, so I was seeing other people, but work was different. But yeah, basically I bubbled with him, he lived by himself. So our dating was a little bit different than most people, because we couldn't go out for dinners. All we could really do was hang out in each other's houses or just go to places in the countryside to walk, because you were allowed to do that then. So we went to Otley Shevin and we watched the sunset together, and it was beautiful. And I think it was the first time I'd been to the Otley Shevin, even though I'd lived in Leeds for years. And yeah, it was really beautiful. So that's kind of what this border reminds me of. And I just love that this blanket feels like the past, I think it's 7 or 8, I think I'm coming up on 8 years living in Yorkshire, and I love living here. And it feels like, and then sort of all of the inspiration at that time in my life of being out in the countryside in Yorkshire and just loving it. And that's kind of where this inspiration has come from. And I love it, and I cannot wait to share these patterns with you. We are going to be starting off with some of the easier squares and then slowly getting harder and harder and learning new stitches as we go. I've written a full stitch guide with photo tutorials for each of those stitches. I've written a guide on how to read the pattern, and you are going to have a tutorial for every single one of the squares, but I haven't made those tutorials yet. I'm planning on making a second sample of this blanket in a double knit yarn, and I'm going to put some yarn palettes and packs together for you, so if you don't feel very confident choosing colours, you can kind of let me do that for you, and I'll recommend some yarns and some colours for you. So yeah, I will put up a video all about this blanket at some point with sort of more information about it and sort of what you're going to need to get started. But do start thinking about your yarn choices now. If you do have some hand-dyed mini skeins or a yarn advent you want to use, like this is perfect for a yarn advent. But if you want to use a double knit weight yarn, you could maybe choose 8 colours because there's 24 squares, and you could make 3 squares in each colour. I think that would look beautiful too. So yeah, start thinking about the yarns and the colours you want to use. And yeah, I can't wait to share that pattern with you. So I think I'm going to end that podcast here. I hope that wasn't too all over the place because it's been quite a long time since I filmed. So yeah, I'm hoping that you enjoyed this podcast, and I will see you next time.